Good morning, everyone. So, I'm still doing reviews of this book, chapter by chapter, which I don't usually do because this channel started off just as talking about the books I read, not trying to summarize in a comprehensive or educational manner the books themselves. But this book, I think, is so good and actually so important, especially now, given the state of politics in the West and the state of most people's living standards in the West. You know, if you don't care about politics, I'm sure you care if you can afford to eat. Chapter 3 is called The Rise of Neoliberal International. Neoliberalism, you've probably heard the phrase. The term was coined in 1938 at a conference, and its two main players or two main founders, let's say, of neoliberal ideas are Friedrich Hayek and Ludwig von Mises, both from Nazi-occupied Austria, so Austrian economists, let's say. And their idea was essentially that any form of government which seeks to repress the individual will eventually become something really bad, really evil, like Nazism. They were both in Nazi-occupied Austria, let's not forget, or communism. So forms of collectivism, as they called it. And then later on, in 1944, I think, they started publishing their books, very, very well-known books, which I actually mentioned in the short on this channel, Favorite Books of the Rich and Powerful. And I probably got the date of publication wrong there, but apologies for that. You know, it was a quick short. They were published in the 40s. So the books were The Road to Serfdom by Hayek and Bureaucracy by von Mises. Now, the rich absolutely loved these books, all right, because they saw in there an opportunity to present as an argument by economists that any form of regulation, any form of taxation, anything which stopped them from having as much money as possible was bad. And they poured loads of money into promoting these ideas because the ideas really, especially after the war, were, you know, absolutely, people thought they were ridiculous, stupid, disgusting even, because the way the rich packaged them was essentially saying that we should not be taxed, we should not be regulated, there should be no democracy, we should just be in charge and we should do exactly what we want. Pretty much sounds like the kind of people that Farage worked for, or Trump. It sounds like his kind of message, doesn't it? You know, I mean, he's got Elon Musk, or he had Elon Musk in the White House, get the richest man in the world to help you make decisions. Well, who's that going to help? Not anybody else but the rich, right? So what happened is that DeWitt Wallace at the time was owner of the Reader's Digest. He was an anti-communist, and Reader's Digest was the biggest magazine by subscribers in the US. So they published condensed versions of The Road to Serfdom in Reader's Digest, and then Look magazine did it. And you had all these rich backers start backing these ideas and spreading these ideas. Why? Because it allowed them to have more power and more control, right? You know, democracy is bad and let the rich do what they want. The ideas in these books can also be summed up as democracy is bad and evil and liberty is good. Now, some of the work done to spread these books was things like founding, you know, not founding, but massively funding departments such as the in the University of Chicago, which is still like the central, you know, propaganda machine for neoliberalism. It doesn't teach any other form of economics. Forget it. It's all neoliberalism, right? Well, that was just something I haven't read, but I'm assuming. But it was founded by the backers of neoliberalism. And then University of Virginia is another one. I think Hayek or von Mises. Between them, they had teaching posts at the University of New York and the University of Chicago, and it was all about just propagating their ideas. For 3 decades, this carried on, and nobody wanted to know about these ideas outside of those who'd been indoctrinated. For example, in the Ford Company, you know, versions of their books were condensed and made more digestible and given to every single worker. The Ford Company, Coors Brewing Company, Coke Industries, the Koch brothers, they all backed these things. And one of the first institutes they founded back in the, it might have been the 40s, was the Mont Pelerin Society. These have become think tanks, which are supposedly, you know, objective think tanks that do research, but actually all they do is they push ideas of their agenda, generally very right-wing ideas. And so you had the Mont Pelerin Society, you had the Cato Institute, you had the Institute for Economic Affairs, the kind of things that are, you know, allowed onto mainstream media to give their insight, their information. It's basically just propaganda. If calling it information, impartial information is bullshit, right? So in these ideas, like I said, people thought that were absolutely terrible. And then in 19, I think it was in the 1947, or it might have been later, but it was after the first book. Hayek published another book, and by now, he'd been made fairly rich and fairly famous through the backing of all these uh, rich, basically what would today be the billionaire class. And he wrote another book, which is what the authors say was the authors of this book, Peter Hutchinson and George Monbiot, both excellent writers and journalists, was the transition from extreme idea, neoliberalism, to sophisticated con, where it was basically just, here's another book, and this is what all my rich backers want me to tell you. And this one, the Constitutional Liberty, he said liberty is absolute freedom, and the way to allow absolute freedom, they don't mention this, but only for the very rich, by the way, is to oppose democracy, because democracy is just the majority making your decisions for you. But you being the very rich, but never saying that you's, classified here as everybody, all of us, must have absolute freedom to do exactly what we want. No regulation, no restrictions, but actually it only applies to the rich. Maybe because everyone else is too stupid. They must be stupid. They haven't got money, right? Yeah, they're all just, peasants. So that's when it became really extreme. Nobody liked these ideas, like I said, because you can see how bad they'd be, right? It's basically having dictators, and those dictators' main interest is making as much money as possible. They're not going to do you much good, are they? And sure, it'd be nice to be rich, but to be a dictator, to have absolute freedom, to oppose democracy, that sounds a bit like fascism for the very rich. Any parallels that you can think of in modern society? So, interesting, actually, later in this book they talk about how fascism, the rise of racism, the rise of extreme movements, the rise of populist leaders, is an offshoot, an unavoidable offshoot, actually, of capitalism, especially neoliberalism, which is capitalism on steroids. It doesn't do anybody much good, does it? So in the 1970s, the post-war boom, what the French called the Glorious 30, from 1935 to 1975, was coming to an end. 1975, New York City declared bankruptcy. Things had actually been going really, really, really well for most people in the Western world. Why? Probably because they'd been run on Keynesian ideas, high taxation, welfare state, in investment into public services, public ownership. Now, the backers of the backers of neoliberalism hated these ideas. God damn, right? Why should anybody but themselves benefit from all the money they could make? Screw everybody else. What they don't seem to realize is that with everybody else, they're screwed. If all your workers are starving, they're going to do this. Crushing trade unions, that was one of the things that became really popular when, after the Glorious 30 came to an end in the 70s, one of the most famous students of Friedman and Hayek was von Mises and Hayek was Milton Friedman. He became advisor to Ronald Reagan, and apparently Thatcher used to carry around a dog-eared copy of the Constitution of Liberty in her handbag, so legend has it. Anyway, they were the people who put into practice neoliberalism in politics, and actually those ideas are still, teetering on the prosthetic golden diamond encrusted limbs, because they've all fallen to shit as they ruined everybody's lives. They should be dead by now, those ideas, but they're still going because the very, very rich back them. And I think the arms industry probably has a bit to play in that as well, because the arms industry makes tons of money. But that's an offshoot. I'll try and stay off of the offshoots and keep this video from being too long. And the name neoliberalism in 1951 stopped being used. Maybe they realized, hang on, we have got such a bad idea here, we better say we're not actually that bad idea, we're something completely different. And so it became that completely different thing and got shoved down our throats in the form of Thatcherism and Reaganism. And Friedman became such a superstar, he got given his own TV show, infomercials, on MBS. And of course Hayek won the Nobel Prize, Friedman won the Nobel Prize. Um, it says a lot about the value of the Nobel Prize. So when somebody like Netanyahu goes to Trump and says, "Oh, by the way, here's a letter. I'm not going to give you stupid cartoon drawings of bombs that nobody's got and say they're 2 minutes from bombing the world," when actually Israel is the biggest and most aggressive nuclear power in the Middle East. And Iran, which is meant to be a threat, by the way, has always been a signatory, a founding signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. You won't hear that in Western media, will you? Because we're meant to have a bogeyman, an evil one who suppresses their women, they're Muslimist. It all goes hand in hand, all this stupidity. Actually, Japan and Iran are both currently the most active countries in the world for the disarmament or destruction of all weapons of mass destruction. Um, well, because they both, you know, uh, Japan's been the only country to have been on a wide scale bombed, nuclear bombs, atomic bombs, Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and then Iran was attacked with chemical weapons. So they both know what it's like. So they're really not threats. They're probably doing more to prevent nuclear war than any other country on Earth. Except if you push them far enough and if you attack them far enough, eventually they're going to say, fuck you lot, i.e. Israel, which loves bombing every country on its borders, for the sake of peace and democracy. Basically, mass murderers, right? Extermination International. Um, but yeah, very good book, this, The Invincible Doctrine. And usually I only do one video per book, but this one is so good, I think it's actually, I've got a couple of subscribers or something now on this channel, and I think more people should know about this book, which is why I'm doing it chapter by chapter. So if you don't like the chapter by chapter reviews, just let me know in the comments. If you do like them, let me know. Most books I'm going to keep doing just as a single book review, because the idea behind this channel was sharing the love of reading, because people don't seem to read that much anymore. But yeah, some books are so damn good, I think we need to do this. Let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you.